It wasn't the empty chair that broke me. It was the way my mother-in-law moved her handbag off the seat. Not for me, but for my sister-in-law's coat. I stood in the doorway of the banquet hall, holding a box of my grandmother's china. I'd driven 2 hours to bring. Because she'd asked me to. Because she'd said it would mean so much. Because I actually believed her. The rehearsal dinner had already started. My name wasn't on any of the place cards. I walked the full length of that table twice before someone finally noticed me standing there. That someone was my husband's aunt. She looked at me the way you look at a FedEx driver who showed up at the wrong address. Polite confusion, nothing more. "Oh," she said, "we weren't sure you were coming." My husband had confirmed our attendance 3 weeks ago. I had confirmed it again myself by text 9 days ago. I had a screenshot. I didn't say any of that. I smiled and said I wouldn't miss it. She pointed to a small round table near the kitchen. One of those folding tables they set up when the head count goes over what the room can hold. It had a white tablecloth on it that was slightly too big, so the corners pooled on the floor. There were 2 other people sitting there. A distant cousin nobody quite remembered inviting, and a teenage nephew who was on his phone and didn't look up once the entire night. I sat down. My husband was at the main table, between his mother and his sister. He caught my eye across the room and gave me a small nod. That was it. That was all. I put my grandmother's china box under my chair, and I ordered the salmon, and I sat at the overflow table at my own rehearsal dinner. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without context, and context is everything. My husband? I'll call him what he always called himself around his family, the responsible one. And I had been together for 4 years when we got engaged. His family was old Virginia money, the kind that doesn't talk about the money but makes sure you feel it in every room you walk into. His mother had a particular talent for warmth that evaporated the moment you needed it most. She could hug you hello and make you feel, somehow, less than you did before the hug. His sister was simpler. She just didn't like me. She never pretended otherwise. I grew up in Ohio. My father drove a school. My mother worked reception at a dental office for 22 years. We were fine. We were good, actually. We had a house we owned and a dog named Chester and Sunday dinners that ran late because nobody wanted to leave. I didn't have generational wealth. I had something else. A family that actually showed up for each other, which, as it turned out, was the thing his family would never forgive me for not having. Early on, his mother made a comment about my engagement ring. She said it had a certain charm. My ring was beautiful. My husband had picked it out himself. I let the comment go. She made a comment about my dress at Christmas. She made a comment about my job. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. Framing it as sweet, as though I spent my days doing arts and crafts with toddlers rather than working with kids who have neurological differences that affect their entire lives. I let those go too. I was so good at letting things go. What I wasn't good at was reading the full picture. Because while I was letting things go, his family was building a case. Not against me specifically. Against the idea of me. Against what I represented, which was the fact that their son, their responsible one, had chosen someone who didn't fit the blueprint. Someone whose parents didn't summer anywhere. Someone who didn't know which fork was for the salad, and which was for the entree until she was 26 and looked it up. The rehearsal dinner was at a venue his mother had booked and paid for. I understood that. I was grateful. I said it. I meant it. What I didn't understand was that paying for a thing in this family meant owning the thing, including the guest list, including the seating, including me. The dinner lasted 3 hours. I ate my salmon. I talked to the cousin, whose name was something like Bartlett or Bennett. He went by a nickname I couldn't quite catch. He was actually interesting, it turned out. He'd left the family business years ago and was now restoring boats in coastal Maine. He seemed as baffled by the table assignment as I was. Across the room, my mother-in-law gave a toast. It was beautiful. It was about her son, his childhood, his character, the kind of man he'd become. She talked about the family he came from. She talked about the values he carried. She didn't mention me by name, not once. She raised her glass at the end and said, "To the future, the future. Not to us, not to the couple, Not to me, the woman her son had chosen to spend his life with. To the future. Plural and undefined, like I might or might not be part of it. My husband squeezed his mother's hand after she sat down. He was beaming. I excused myself to the restroom and stood at the sink with the water running and breathed. I thought about my grandmother's china under my chair. I had driven 2 hours with that box on my back seat, the dishes wrapped in dish towels and newspaper, because his mother had asked. She wanted the table set with something meaningful, she'd said. Something with history. I had handed it to the venue coordinator when I arrived. I'd watched her carry it toward the kitchen. The main table had been set with rented white plates. I stood at that sink for 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my phone. Then I dried my hands and went back to my folding table and finished my meal. My husband walked me to my car at the end of the night. He held my hand. He said it had gone well. He said his mother had seemed happy. I said, "That's good." He said, "You okay?" I said, "Long day." He kissed me on the forehead and said he'd see me tomorrow. Tomorrow being our wedding day, I drove 40 minutes to the hotel where my parents were staying. I knocked on their door at 10:30 at night, and my mother opened it in her robe and took one look at my face and said, "Come in, come here." She pulled me into the kind of hug that means she already knows without needing to be told. I sat on the edge of their hotel bed and my father muted the game, and I told them about the table. My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Do you want to get married tomorrow?" I said yes, not because of his family, because of him. Because I knew who he was when it was just the two of us. Because I had to believe that was enough. My mother didn't say anything. She just kept her hand on my back. The wedding was at a venue 30 minutes outside the city. It was beautiful. The kind of day where the light hits a certain way and you keep thinking, I should remember this. I should hold on to this. I walked down the aisle toward him and he cried. He actually cried. 2 tears, right down the left side of his face, and he didn't wipe them away. I thought, this is real. Whatever else is happening, this is real. The ceremony was everything I had imagined. My best friend read something by Mary Oliver. My husband wrote his vows himself. Something about choosing me every day, about the ordinary Tuesday mornings, about wanting to be the person who noticed when I was struggling before I had to say it. I meant every word of mine. We took photos in a garden that smelled like rain and roses. My husband's mother was lovely during the photos. She put her arm around me and smiled for the camera, and at one point touched my veil and said it was stunning. I thanked her. I meant that too. The reception was different. The seating at the reception had been arranged by his mother. This I knew. This I had agreed to, because choosing my battles meant letting some things go, and I thought the rehearsal dinner was the thing. This will be fine. It was not fine. My parents were at table 11. Table 11 was near the back beside the bar, which sounds fine until you realize the bar was the service bar. The one the caterers used to load trays. Not the one guests were meant to use. It was loud there. The door to the kitchen swung open every few minutes. My mother spent the first hour of my reception with her chair pushed forward because the wall was too close behind her. My maid of honor, Deandra, who had flown in from Portland, who had helped me pick my dress, who had been my closest friend since our first year of college, was at table 9. Table 9 was fine, but table 9 had no one she knew. She spent the first 20 minutes introducing herself to strangers at her own best friend's wedding. My cousin Whitmore, my actual family, the people I grew up with, the people who sent cards and called on holidays and showed up, were spread across 3 tables in the back quadrant of the room. His family, his cousins, his mother's friends from the junior league, his father's golf partners, were at tables 1 through 6. The ones closest to the dance floor, the ones that could see the sweetheart table clearly. At my own wedding, I could barely see my parents. I noticed it during the first dance. I was supposed to be watching my husband, and I swear I was, but over his shoulder I kept seeing my mother at table 11. She was smiling. She was trying so hard to smile, and I knew what that smile cost her. His mother gave another toast. Again beautiful. Again about her son. Again about the family he came from. She mentioned me this time, once, near the end. She said she hoped I understood what it meant to join a family with this much history. She said she hoped I would honor it. Honor it. I was 31 years old. I had a master's degree. I had built a career from nothing, with loans and night shifts, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from wanting something badly enough to earn it without a safety net. I had loved her son carefully and completely for 4 years. She hoped I would honor the history. I smiled and raised my glass. My husband squeezed my hand under the table. He was still beaming. Later, during the cake cutting, his sister said something to me that I almost didn't catch. She leaned in close, under the guise of adjusting my veil, and she said quietly, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Don't get too comfortable. They always come back." I didn't know what she meant. I would figure it out later, much later. We moved to a city 3 hours away 6 months after the wedding. My husband had taken a position at a firm there. I transferred to a clinic. It felt like breathing. It felt like space. We built a life that was genuinely ours. A neighborhood we chose, friends we made together, Sunday mornings that belonged only to us. His family visited twice a year. I was always ready. I always made the effort. I cooked dinners that took half a day. I asked after people by name. I remembered details. I was good at this. I had to be. His mother was never unkind during those visits. That's the thing about this kind of person. They're never unkind in a way you can name. They're polite. They're gracious. They leave compliments with just enough air inside them that you can't decide if you're being praised or minimized. What a cozy place you've made this can mean anything. You can never quite grab hold of it. His sister came once. She stayed for 2 nights and left a day early with an excuse about work. Before she left, she took a phone call in the kitchen that I wasn't meant to hear, but the walls in our apartment were not thick. I heard her say my name. I heard her say, "She's doing her best, but you can tell." You could tell what, she never said. The call ended. She came back into the living room and said the kitchen smelled wonderful. I kept being good at letting things go. The second Christmas after we were married, his mother suggested we spend the holidays at the family home in Virginia. A full week. I said yes. I always said yes. The house was large. The kind of large where the guest room you're given says everything about where you stand. Our room was on the 3rd floor. A fine room, genuinely. But his sister and her husband had the 2nd floor guest suite, with the attached bath and the view of the garden. I noticed. I said nothing. On Christmas Eve, the family had a tradition of going to a particular church service at 8 o'clock. I hadn't grown up religious in any formal way, but I respected it, and I went. And I stood when they stood and sat when they sat, and I meant it as a gesture of good faith. After the service, we came home, and his mother made hot chocolate and brought out a tin of cookies that had been in the family for years. A recipe from someone's grandmother, and she went around the room, giving everyone a cookie, and she skipped me. Not obviously. She was in conversation. She moved past me while laughing at something, his uncle said. The tin went back to the kitchen. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she didn't notice. But his sister noticed that I noticed, and she looked at me from across the room with an expression I can only describe as satisfied. I went to bed early that night, said I had a headache. My husband fell asleep within 10 minutes. I lay there in the dark and I thought about something my mother had said to me a long time ago. She said, "The loneliest you can feel is in a room full of people who've decided not to see you." I finally understood what she meant. I didn't make a decision that night. Decisions like the one I eventually made don't happen in a single night. They accumulate. The way water accumulates in a low place until it has nowhere left to go. The thing that finally shifted it was small. Smaller even than the rehearsal dinner, than the seating chart, than the cookie tin. It was a photograph. His mother, I learned through a mutual friend the following spring, had sent out a family photo for Easter, the kind you mail as a card, the kind some families still do. She had taken a photo at Christmas. Everyone gathered in the living room, in front of the tree, dressed in their good clothes. I was in that photo. Except in the version she mailed, I wasn't. She had cropped me out. Not sloppily. She'd done it with enough care that you'd have to know I was supposed to be there to notice the gap. But I knew. I had been standing between my husband and his uncle. In the mailed version, my husband stood beside his uncle with nothing between them. The mutual friend mentioned it offhandedly. She thought I knew. She thought surely I knew. I didn't say anything to her. I thanked her for mentioning it and changed the subject. That night I sat at our kitchen table for a long time. My husband was traveling for work. I had a cup of tea I didn't drink. I thought about 4 years of choosing not to name things. I thought about a box of china under a folding table. I thought about my mother sitting in front of a swinging kitchen door in a sequin top she'd bought specifically for my wedding. I thought, I am done. Not done with my husband. Not done with the marriage. Done with performing gratitude for a family that had decided, before I ever walked in the door, that there was no room for me. Done with letting it pass. Done with being good at this. I didn't confront anyone. That's the part people don't expect when they hear the rest. There was no phone call, no letter, no moment where I stood in a doorway and said everything I'd held back. That's not who I am. What I did was quieter, and in the long run, more effective. I called my mother-in-law and told her in a warm and even voice that I wanted to be honest with her because I respected her. I told her that I had seen the Easter card. I told her that I wasn't calling to argue. I was calling because I thought she should know that I knew, and that going forward, I would be making some changes. She started to explain. I let her go for a few sentences. Then I said, gently, but with absolute clarity, I'm not calling to discuss it. I just wanted you to know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said my name in the way that people say your name when they're about to reframe the conversation. I said, I hope you have a good evening, and I ended the call. I stopped going to Virginia. Not dramatically. I just stopped making it work. Every visit, she suggested, there was a reason. A work commitment, a friend's event, a conflict I handled with perfect politeness. My husband went a few times without me. That was fine. That was his family, his choice. But I was finished, pretending there was a place for me at that table. What I didn't know was that my mother-in-law had been telling a version of our relationship to everyone in their circle for years. And the version she told painted me as difficult, ungrateful, someone who had pulled her son away from his family. I found this out because his aunt, not the one from the rehearsal dinner, a different one, a woman with kind eyes, who had once, at a birthday party, taken 20 minutes to ask me real questions about my work. She called me, out of the blue. 6 months after the Easter card, she said, I've been hearing things and I want to ask you directly, because you've never been anything but good to me. She told me what was being said. I thanked her for calling. I told her the truth. Not dramatically, not defensively. Just the truth. The rehearsal dinner, the seating chart, the photo. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, I had no idea about the photo. I know, I said. She told us you refused to be in it, she said. She said you thought it was tacky. I had been at that photo. I said smiled for it. I remembered the exact moment it was taken. Because my husband had made a joke right before the flash went off, and everyone in the room had laughed. I had stood between him and his uncle, and I had laughed at my husband's joke, and someone had pressed the button, and that was the last time I existed, officially, in that family's recorded history. I didn't know that conversation with his aunt would become the thing that changed everything. I wasn't trying to start something. I was just answering her directly, the way she'd asked. But his aunt was not a quiet person. She was thorough. She asked other people questions. She compared notes. She found a few things that didn't add up. And at the next family gathering, a summer birthday party for his mother, which I did not attend because I had a work conference, which was real, which I had documentation for, she apparently said some of what she'd learned. I wasn't there. I only heard about it secondhand from my husband, who called me from the parking lot of the venue, sounding like someone had knocked the air out of him. There was a whole conversation, he said, about you. About things. I didn't realize. He stopped. He tried again. The photo. I didn't know about the photo. I know, I said. You knew and you didn't tell me? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about how many things I hadn't told him because I was trying to protect him, or because I was afraid of what it would cost us, or because I had been so good for so long at absorbing the cost myself that it had become automatic. I didn't know how, I said. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, I need to think. Okay, I said. Not about us, he said quickly, about everything else. I need to think about everything else. I sat with that. I let it mean what it meant. He came home the next day. He walked in, and he sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and he put his hands flat on the surface, the way people do when they're about to say something hard. He said, I think I've been asking you to be patient with things I shouldn't have made you patient with. I didn't say anything, he said. The rehearsal dinner at the table, I nodded. I knew that was wrong, he said. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I told myself you were fine. I wasn't fine, I said. I know that now. We sat there for a while in the particular silence of two people who are finally in the same room instead of on opposite sides of a performance. He said, What do you need from me? That was the question I had been waiting 4 years for someone in his family to ask. Not him, his family. But he was asking it now, on their behalf and his own, and it was the right question at the right time. And I knew, sitting across from him at our kitchen table, that it mattered. I told him what I needed. Some of it was practical. Some of it was about boundaries that should have been drawn years ago. Some of it was just being believed, not argued with, not redirected, not managed. Just believed. He listened, he didn't defend, he didn't deflect. He said, okay. The conversation his aunt had started kept moving through the family the way conversations do when someone finally asks the right questions. I didn't track it in real time. I wasn't watching for it. I had other things to do. A new caseload at the clinic, a woman at work I'd become friends with, a garden I'd started on our tiny balcony that was taking up more of my mental energy than I expected in the best way. But things shifted. I felt it in small ways before I could name it. His mother called me, not to explain. That conversation had already happened, and it had gone nowhere. But she called, and she said my name at the start in a different register than usual. Less performance. Less careful warmth. Something flatter. Something closer to real. She said, I think there are things I could have done differently. I waited. She didn't elaborate. She also didn't apologize, not directly. But she said that sentence, and she let it sit, and I understood what it cost her to say even that much. I understood it because I had spent 4 years saying things cost her nothing. I said, I think so too. We haven't become close, I don't think we will. But the dynamic changed. The particular performance of her graciousness. That warm surface with nothing underneath. It cracked. And in the crack, there was something that might eventually become honest. I don't need her to love me. I stopped needing that a long time ago. What I needed was to stop being invisible in my own life. To stop standing in doorways with boxes of china and finding no place set for me. To stop watching my mother smile through a swinging kitchen door and not say a word about it. I needed to stop letting things go that were not mine to carry in the first place. My parents came to visit us in the fall. My mother brought apple cake, the kind she makes with the cardamom and brown sugar, and my father brought a documentary he'd recorded that he wanted to watch with us. We ate at our kitchen table, not the dining room. The kitchen table, which is smaller and closer, and where we talk better. And my mother told a story about a woman at the dental office that made us all laugh until my husband had to put his fork down. After dinner, my mother and I did the dishes. My husband and my father went to the living room to watch the documentary, and I could hear them talking. Not about the documentary, about something my father was curious about, some project my husband was working on, and my husband explaining it carefully, taking it seriously, the way he always does with my dad. My mother handed me a dish to dry and she said, without preamble, he's a good one. I said, I know, she said, the rest of it? That's just the rest of it. You figure it out as you go. I dried the dish. I thought about the folding table at the rehearsal dinner, and the china box under my chair, and the Easter card with the gap where I used to be. I thought about the phone call that changed something, and the kitchen table conversation that changed something else, and the small ongoing project of being honest about what costs too much. My mother handed me another dish. Outside, my father laughed at something my husband said. I thought, this is what I built. Not the version they imagined for me. Not the blueprint. These people in this kitchen. This table that has enough room. I had been given the gap. I made something else out of it. That's the only kind of stage that matters.